Welcome to this video where you'll learn how to batch prompt templates in Salesforce with flows. Where it starts is we have a schedule triggered flow that's supposed to schedule on a particular date and time. And you can set this to run daily, weekly, depending on how frequently you want to run it. In my use case, it's a recruiter use case where they want to generate candidate AI summaries on candidate records. Doing this manually takes a lot of time, so you can automate it at scale using prompt templates to run in a batch fashion. So our flow will check for all the candidate records that satisfy criteria where their summary is not already generated. And then for each of the triggering candidate records on the scheduled date and time, we use the prompt batch action in flows to invoke our candidate summary prompt template, which has all the instructions to take input from the candidate records and also the attached resume file to generate a candidate summary by reaching out to an LLM. And once that summary is generated, that gets stored back in the summary response field on the candidate record.
We have a recruiting app where we have new candidate records coming in every day. Our recruiters are spending too much time reading through the uploaded resumes and the walls of text in the various fields on the candidate records. We have a custom object called candidate records with fields for the candidate details like name, their experience, skills, etc. We also have a summary field called the candidate AI summary field where we want to store the AI generated summary. Now I can go and generate this individually for every candidate, but we know that's not going to scale. Well, our goal is to automate this process such that every day when we find all candidate records that haven't been summarized, then we have an automated process to generate the AI summary and save it for each of those records. For this, we are going to build a scheduled triggered flow that runs daily, that finds all the candidate records that haven't been summarized, and then use a prompt template to generate a crisp and concise summary for every new candidate on a candidate AI summary field on the candidate record. So the first step is building that prompt template. So here it's very simple. I use my prompt and I give it a definition, a role, and a purpose. I structure how the summary should look like, how it should be formatted. I ground the data, which is the most important part, with the candidate record details. And I also attach the resume through the combined attachment related list file. And at the end, I can add any other information in terms of how the output response should look like. Now, clearly here we are using a resume input through the file attachment, and it can be an image or it can be a PDF. So make sure you select the model that supports that type of input. In my case, I've used Google Gemini 2.5 Pro. Once you have this prompt template built and activated, we can go ahead and build our flow. So you can see I've created a schedule trigger flow to run weekly at a particular time. Of course, you can schedule it for an off-peak time. Once we select the object that we want to trigger against, in our case, which is candidate, you can choose to filter out the records that already have a summary. So we add a decision element that will check for the same. So in this case, if the outcome is where the candidate AI summary field is blank, then we continue with our process. If it is, then we stop. So the records that don't have a summary now follow this path, and the next step is adding the action. So now we want to add the prompt template or trigger the prompt template. The way you do that is by adding an element, which is called the action. And here you see all kinds of actions, but you can search for prompt templates. And here, this is the prompt template that we had created earlier. So you can see there are two. So one is called the batch candidate summary, and the other is the one for the batch generation. So what we want to do is select the batch generation for a use case where we want it to run for batch. Since I've already created that here, I'll just delete that, and let's review the details. So I give it a label, I give it some name, there's some description. And in my testing, I've noticed that the timeout length for one day works really well, because once this gets triggered as scheduled, generally it takes about 2 hours to kickstart. For the input, we select the triggering candidate record. And for output, either you can manually assign those, or like me, you can just keep it as it is. And you can see there are two output resources, the invocation ID and the prompt response. So now what we can do is we can use this prompt response output and update our candidate record so that that prompt response is assigned to the candidate AI summary field. So once you have built this schedule triggered flow and activated it, we can wait for the flow to get triggered. at the particular time. Once it gets triggered, an AI job run is created with the ready status. The job has several job items for each records, and once the job begins processing, the status updates to in progress. Once the job completes, it updates to the completed status for successful runs and to the failed status for error runs. Now you can review the status of the AI job run and the AI job run item by using a tool like the bench press extension for Salesforce or Postman or call commands. In my case, I'm using the Salesforce bench press. So you can look for the AI job run object and you can query to all the fields. And what I want to do is I want to and what I want to do is I want to and what I want to do is sort them by the created date so that I have the latest run show up earlier. So once I query it, you can see the latest one that got triggered is showing up here and I have the ID for that. And you can see it's in the new status. You also see which prompt template it was using. So now let's wait for this to kickstart and we can review the results later.
Let's have a look at how things progress. So you can see in about around 30 minutes, it did execute, and you can see the status completed. So let's go back to our candidates and see if this worked. So I'm just gonna refresh my screen, and you can see the candidate summary is now saved. Let's look at the other records to see if it did its job on all the records. Yes. And there you have it. We just use our prompt template and use the schedule triggered flow to run the prompt template in a batch fashion so that you don't have to go to every record and generate the summaries manually one by one.